Hi there, Prairie Plant Girl here. So I'm out in my yard today. I'm over here by my pollinator garden, and I came out yesterday real quick. We're lucky and we're having some just absolutely gorgeous fall weather, late fall. It's the very last week of October here, and in my Zone 3 garden, that means we really could have had snow already, and it's still green and warm and beautiful out right now. So I took advantage of that weather yesterday and came out and planted some native seeds. And I was telling some people that I'd been out doing that, and they were surprised that I was planting seeds this time of year. And so I thought maybe it was worthy of bringing you along and just showing you what I was doing. So late fall is a great time to be planting your native seeds or any seeds that need cold stratification. So I was out yesterday and I planted prairie coneflower, dotted blazing star, tufted fleabane, hairy golden aster, Lindley's aster, some prairie crocus, three-flowered avens, alum root, and right behind me here I planted some purple prairie clover. So I've planted these all over the yard, and when I plant them this time of year, they're going to have the chance to go. They won't start growing right now, so I don't have to worry about the seeds breaking dormancy and having young seedlings that are going to be taken out by the cold and the frost of our impending winter. But what they will get is they'll get some moisture from the autumn rains and the snow, and then they'll get that cold freezing cycle, and quite often they'll go through some freezes and some thaws and some freeze and thaw cycles, which can be very beneficial for a lot of these seeds for breaking dormancy. So this is a great time to do that. If you don't plant them outside, another option would be to do some winter sowing, which is planting them outside, but it's waiting until later in the season and doing the milk jugs. And I do have a video or two on that. I don't find that my favorite option, but it does work. With some of these more native plants, I find a lot of them don't like to be moved. So if you're starting them in a milk jug, sometimes that transferring of the seedling out into the ground can be detrimental to it. A lot of them have big tap roots, especially at least in my climate where it's a hot, dry prairie. They're going to get those big tap roots that go deep, deep in the ground, and sometimes having those roots disturbed even early on can be fatal to the plants. If you can't do the outdoor sowing in the end of autumn and you don't do the milk jug sowing, like the winter sowing outside, another option is to stratify the seeds, and you have to look up for the plant. A lot of them have very specific times for minimum times of being put in the freezer, and some of them need to be in like moist potting medium. Some of them need to be scarified a little bit with sand or sandpaper or something, and then they need some warm periods, and lots of them need to be chilled again in the freezer, the refrigerator. So it can be just a lot more work to do that sort of thing inside. Whereas if you bring the seeds outside in late autumn, they usually will get what they want, especially if they're native to your area, because that's how nature does it. They drop their seeds in the fall, and the seeds sit there over the autumn and break dormancy, usually in a single winter season, and then they'll grow the following spring. So the biggest difficulty that I find when growing especially native plants from seed outside and planting the seeds in the fall is it can be hard to know what's coming up. Is it weeds or plants that you put there the following spring? And it can take them a while to get going too. So I try really hard to put a label in the area where I'm putting the seeds, and don't scatter the seeds too far unless I'm going to put multiple labels. And then I have to be really careful not to go and just do some quick weeding in those areas without really paying attention to the plants. And lots of times I'll even just leave everything growing, weeds and all, until I really know what's what. And then I'll go along and pull the weeds out later. But marking those spots is really important, and you need to mark them with something that's going to be legible still the following year. And it can even be helpful to take your phone out of your pocket and just snap a quick picture of the area and the label with the name on it, so that you know what you put where, and just in case the label gets knocked out, you know, by pets or kids, or, you know, snow shoveling or whatnot. But so I did most of my sowing yesterday, but I have just a couple of seeds of dwarf milkweed, and I'd like to try some of it in my backyard, and I think I found a space where it might be a nice spot to put it. Now, it's only a few seeds. One thing that's nice to do when you're doing this type of sowing is to do to seed heavily, I find. Just, you know, you're going to have things like mice or birds and that might come along and eat some of the seeds. So you know, just sowing thickly can help, and some of them just might not germinate. But I have some dwarf milkweed. The seed is a couple years old now, but I'm hoping it'll still be good. And I'd like to put it in one little corner of my backyard here. And then I'll take you and I'll show you, it's died back for the fall now, but I'll show you where I have some that I've put in previous times. I think that I actually did milk jug sowing I think it was last winter, and planted it this spring out in the yard, and in my front yard, and it grew. So I'll let you see that. It's not much to look at right now, but at least you can see it. It's there. But dwarf milkweed is one of those Asclepias family of plants that attract monarch butterflies. They're very full of nectar. They're a great plant to have in your yard, and contrary to the name, they're not really weedy. They can self-seed. Some of them spread through rhizomes, but I've been growing a variety of milkweed in my yard for several years now, and I haven't found them to be a problem. If you're really concerned, like I have one here behind me, and you might notice there's no seed heads on it, and that's because I will come out and cut the majority of the seed heads off, so that I'm not having a lot of milkweed seeds floating through the air. They're not something, they're easy to pull up if they do seed, but the best way to keep them from self-seeding is to just cut the seed heads off. But let's go over, I'll show you where I'm going to plant this dwarf milkweed, and we'll get it in the ground so you can see how I do this. Okay, so right over here is where I think I want to plant that dwarf milkweed. This is some mugo pines that I have. There's 3 actually here, with a chokecherry tree behind it. And then down to my right here is a flower bed that leads to my patio and my house. And to my left is my garden area. So this spot here will get pretty much full day sun. There'll be a very little portion of the day where it might get a little bit of shade, but it should get sun most of the day. It's a really dry area because of this pine, and most of the research that I found says that this milkweed does prefer a drier space. A lot of milkweeds like a damp area, but this dwarf milkweed prefers something that's just a little bit on the drier side. So the pines here should take up some of that extra moisture, and the soil here should drain pretty well, but it will get some moisture come through with the sun and the snow melt. With rain and snow melt, it should get a good soaking in the spring and then dry out through the summer, which I think these milkweed will prefer. So I'm going to give it a shot in here. You can see a little bit of, I think this is a sedum. I actually got this from my neighbor. These are just the seed heads here that are dried. And then there's some very fine green on it here. But it does well here. It likes this, it's not too damp for this. So I think that the milkweed should do all right. I planted some hairy golden aster on the other side, which is yellow. And the hairy golden aster, I believe, is around 20 inches. And this gets to be about 8 to 20 inches, the milkweed does. So I think that should be a nice balance with you can see this the sedum, when the seed heads come on, it gets to be about 10 inches. I think that'll be a really nice look here, and give a little bit of interest below the pine. The pines are getting a little bit scraggly at the bottom, so this will just give them a little bit of an interest. So the dwarf milkweed has fairly wide, thick leaves, and they're kind of a grayish green. They're quite hairy. And so I think they should add some nice interest below these pines here, just with their leaf color and structure alone. So what I'm doing here is I'm just pulling back any mulch and pine needles that have fallen here. There's a few rocks that have migrated their way over from the pathway, so we'll just get those out of our way. And I'm just going to loosen the soil up a little bit. So the seeds have the roots have something to grab into. And I can feel there's kind of a low spot in here, so I just have, this is some of my homemade compost that I pulled out of my bins when I was emptying them out for the fall. So now I just need to get my seeds and I'll just pop them in here. So there's the seeds, and like I said, I didn't have very many left, so it's just 3. So I'm not sure if I'll get anything out of this, but even if I get 1 plant, that'd be nice to have here. And if not, like I said, I have a plant coming up in the front yard that I'll be able to collect seeds off of in the next year or so, I'm sure. So all I'm going to do is just set them on the ground there, put my tag in to make sure that I don't forget to do that. Oops, hope I put it the way I can read it. And then I'm just going to, this says they need 3 to 6 millimeters or 1/8 to 1/4 inch of soil covering. So just a real light covering of soil is enough. And now I have rain coming up in my forecast in the next day. So I'm not even going to worry about watering this in. If you don't have any moisture coming up, then you should definitely just give it a light watering just to make sure that it's settled and won't blow away in the winds. But I'm quite confident that these will be fine here. So, like I said, these seeds, I've had them for at least a year now, maybe longer. And usually seeds are fine to grow like that. Usually seeds last a pretty long time, and I store mine quite well. You know, they're not getting moisture on them, and I keep them out of like direct sunlight and heat and cold and that, so they should be fine. But there was just the 3 there, so I'm not guaranteed that I'll get any, but I always think it's better to plant the seeds and give it a try than not to. So we'll check back in the spring, and hopefully we have some milkweed growing here, and we'll get a nice little plant here that'll just add a little bit of contrast and just, you know, kind of break up the monotony here in this area. So let's go check out the milkweed that I grew last year. Again, it's the fall, it's died back, but I think you still kind of get an idea of how it's doing. So here's my front yard, and I try to keep it mostly native plantings here, especially in my 3 kind of flower bed areas. So I have an area right there, and there's a pathway on the other side of it, and then another planting area, and then this main pathway where there's a planting area that wraps around the bench. So over here at the back of this area, you can see the dwarf milkweed that I put in here last spring, I believe it was. Now again, this one was done through milk jug sowing, I believe, if I remember correctly. But there's actually a couple of plants here. So this one is a dwarf milkweed, and you can see the big leaves that they get on them. So those are a real big leaf. So for a plant that's small in stature, it has really large leaves that come off of it, and they have, like, even now it still has almost like a velvety feel to it, and it's dried up. So there's another one in behind it here. It's the same thing. So these pretty much got to their maximum height here. They could grow only this tall in some circumstances, but they seem to be really happy right here. So this is their first year, and I have a couple of clumps here that seem to have done well. So I'm looking forward to seeing them continue to thrive and grow in this space. In comparison, I have a Cinderella milkweed here. It's a much smaller plant. I mean, it's a much larger, taller plant, but it has actually smaller leaves. So, oh, there's not many left on this plant, but you can see the leaf is a lot smaller. So there's many varieties of milkweed, and you could just pick the one that works for your space, or have several and have lots of interest. I don't think I mentioned the dwarf milkweed flower is just a very small flower from May to July. It can be kind of a greenish white to a light pink color. And this is another Cinderella Asclepias, and you can see where I've cut it back just enough just to get the seed heads off of it and clean it up a little bit for the fall. But I like to leave these plants standing as much as possible. It helps to trap snow, it helps to protect any insects overwintering, and our ladybugs and green lacewings and things all to overwinter well. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.